So okay, hi and welcome to another video, and yes, this one is Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. It's probably one of the most famous ghost stories in London, and I say ghost story with a big question mark. As you know, and if you do know the history of this, you know there's an explanation for it, but stick with it. This may not be a really long video because there is more interesting stuff here, because we're also going to be covering the Body Snatchers. Now, the Body Snatchers were in the same location as Cock Lane, and as we go through this video you'll understand it. And yeah, anyway, let's go on to the Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. So Cock Lane, you'll find it just at the side of Bart's Hospital. Now, it was Coccus Lane or Coccus Road back in the early 1500s. There's a bit of debate how Cock Lane actually got its name. Some people believe that it was coming from prostitutes. The area of Cock Lane was a proper place for a brothel. And yeah, if you dig into the history of it, and yeah, definitely could be the reason why. Being one of the brothels there was owned by someone called William Cock. So yeah, it's got credence there. More likely it got its name because of cockfighting, which was really common at that time. What it does represent is the furthest point where the Great Fire of London got to. But we're going to be looking at around about the 1760s, where we focus on this ghost story and how it became one of the biggest ghost stories in the history of London. So we actually start our story in Norfolk in about 1750. This is where William King fell in love with Elizabeth Lyons, and they got married and they moved in together. Elizabeth became pregnant, but it was a rather tricky pregnancy, and during that time her sister Fanny moved in and stayed with them. Unfortunately, Elizabeth died in childbirth, but during that period of time William became very friendly with her sister Fanny. So much so that they actually become lovers. And William decided that he was going to move down to London to try and further his business. He was a money lender. He moved down to London, but during that period of time, despite Elizabeth's family's wishes that they'd have no communication with Fanny, he kept writing. And eventually, Fanny moved down to London and stayed with William. Now, the problem what we have is that they moved into a location in Greenwich. Now, the landlord found out and they were living in sin. Because Elizabeth had actually had a child with William, he wasn't allowed to, by law, marry the sister, which was Fanny. So they were living in sin. The landlord didn't like it and kicked them out. And this is where they met Richard Parsons. Now, Richard Parsons owned a house in Cock Lane. He offered William a room to stay there, and William took this up. But during that time, something else happened that sort of explains the rest of the story. William loaned Richard Parsons a lot of money. Now, it's a bit disputed if it was 12 guineas or 21 guineas, but that's still a lot of money now. It was about 1,300 quid or something like that. So yeah, it's quite a lot of money nowadays. During that period of time, Fanny became pregnant. Richard Parsons lived there with his wife and two daughters. The eldest daughter was also called Elizabeth. Now, William had to travel away. When William travelled away, Fanny did not want to stay in the room alone. So what she did, she asked the eldest daughter, Elizabeth, to stay in that room with her. During that period of time, there was scratching sound coming underneath the floorboards. Elizabeth thought this was really strange and started getting scared. Fanny tried to calm her down, but this was something that was going on quite a lot during that period of time. When William came back, Fanny told William about it, and he said it was rather peculiar. They put it down to a carpenter that worked in a shop below. But this carpenter wasn't actually working at the weekends when this sound was heard. So they put it down to maybe something supernatural. Already we're jumping onto the supernatural point here. William and Fanny knew that they weren't going to be able to stay there once the baby was born. Definitely one of the more creepier sites in London. It's a bit of a weird place. So William went out and sought a new location, but unfortunately that wasn't ready, so they moved into a temporary location before the baby was born. Still, Richard hadn't paid back this money. He was paying back a guinea a month, but it was still going on and he wasn't the greatest payer. So William and Fanny moved out, And unfortunately, during that period of time, Fanny became very, very ill. And she was visited by a doctor. And first of all, they thought it was scarlet fever. And hopefully they can get better. But it soon turned out that it was smallpox. And unfortunately, a month after finding that out, Fanny died. You can see in the video that I've taken here that it's quite a tight little alleyway down in Cock Lane. And it has got a creepy feeling about it, even though a lot of the buildings are modernised. There's one building there, which is one of the oldest ones, that had no windows in it when I was walking down there. That definitely gave it more of an eerie feeling. But as I said, we're going to come to the actual history of Cock Lane a little bit more, or mainly a building at the end of it, after we talk about the rest of the Cock Lane. So unfortunately, Fanny had passed away. This is when arguments started between William and the Lyons family. Fanny had left all the money, apart from a couple of £100, to William. The family did not like that. William paid for a coffin for Fanny, and the myth is that it was nailed down, and that Fanny's sister did not get to see, and Fanny's family did not get to see the body of Fanny. What we understand is that there was arguments over how much William had, and that he wasn't actually married to Fanny, and there's no reason why this money should go to him. But Fanny had arranged in her will that the money went to William. But what William didn't know, during this period of time, back at Cock Lane, Richard Parsons' daughter Elizabeth was still complaining about this scratching noise coming from underneath the floorboards. And getting more and more concerned, he asked people to come in and do an investigation, and they'd done a seance. During this seance, held by John Moore, it was concluded by yes and no questions. It was concluded by the use of yes and no questions during the seance that this ghost, or this scratching noise, was coming from Fanny, and it was her ghost trying to communicate with Elizabeth, the Richard Parsons' daughter, that William had poisoned her with arsenic. Now, so this was now a murder case, only supported by paranormal events. A lot of people were quite sceptical, I would say, at the beginning, but this was John Moore, who everyone did respect. William caught wind of what was being said, and at the time this was also reported in one of the local newspapers, and it became quite a public outcry that William had poisoned Fanny, and a spirit of Fanny was communicating and trying to convict the murderer from beyond the grave. William didn't take this quite lightly and contacted his own barrister. But during this time, more and more seances were taking place at Cock Lane, and again, this scratching noise was being heard by the floorboards. At one point, a sceptic person got down on his hands and knees and looked under the bed with a light, a candle, and the sound stopped. And from that moment on, in that seance, nothing happened. So I guess some people were sceptic about this was a true ghost story. But despite that, Elizabeth was having seizures. Parsons believed that this ghost was to blame for these seizures. And some sort of tests were done on Elizabeth. She was taken out into different locations, and they were asked to do these tests on her to see if the spirit was communicating directly with Elizabeth, or was it happening in Cock Lane. And she ended up in Bart's Hospital having these tests done on her. Again, nothing was really concluded. She came back to Cock Lane. By this time, William was getting rather paranoid that he was about to be charged with the murder of his, well, not wife, his lover. So he organised a seance with John Moore there as well, and they asked these series of questions. And during that period of time, again, it was confirmed that this spirit was of Fanny, and not only Fanny, but William's ex-wife Elizabeth was also said to be one of the spirits. During this period of time as well, we have reports of a grey lady being seen going up the stairs within Cock Lane. Now, people say that was the ghost of Fanny going up there, or the ghost of Elizabeth. William was getting more and more concerned now that he was about to be charged. What made it worse for William, that more people were coming up to see Elizabeth and the ghost of Fanny. So much so that Richard Parsons started charging people to go in there and to witness this spirit for themselves. They'll go in there and they'll pay us some money, and the ghost would knock to answers and questions. We had people like the Duke of York turn up there. Got really big. This has gone from a small little maybe lie to something really, really big. But at the same time, the ghost was getting more and more active. Finally, William had had enough, and he turned around and said that he believed that Richard Parsons had concocted this story to get out of paying the money that he was owed. Richard didn't own up to this at this point, but agreed that they'd do another seance. So this is like about the 4th or 5th seance that happened in that building. During this period of time, William got 2 workmen to put up the floorboards, and they found wires and chains under the floorboards that led to another room where somebody could put it and answer the knocks and the rattling. Despite this being found, Richard and Elizabeth turned around and said that they still believed that there was a ghost in that building. And apparently, even when Richard was in prison, because he had to admit that yes, he had tricked a lot of people and that he had faked a lot of this ghost story, but he still turned around and stood by the stance that some of it was down to a ghost. Richard was actually convicted and charged and had to go to prison for 2 years, and a few other people around there got fined. It seemed that a lot of people were in on this hoax, and it became known as one of the biggest hoax stories. And I believe Charles Dickens used this again in one of his books, and it's referred to. And I guess this is one of the first times we can say that media led to people jumping to conclusions. You had all these famous people of the day going down to Cock Lane to see this ghost story that, on the essence of it, is fake. Maybe not as fake as some people have turned around and said, because we still have these independent witnesses to say they see a ghost of a lady going up the stairs, and that Richard Parsons still says that no, this ghost was started off originally as a true thing. And does he explain that the first time this sound was heard was when Elizabeth and Fanny were in that bedroom when William was away, and they heard that scraping underneath the floorboards. Now, the scraping sound had gone on for a long time. Was Richard already concocting this ghost story to get out of paying William the money back? That he had to pay it back in the end, but did he think he was going to really get away with it? But during this period of time, you've also got Fanny's family fuming that William, who was quite well off, he was a money lender, was reaping the rewards of what they see as an illegal relationship with Elizabeth's sister Fanny. So it is quite an interesting story. I say it's not your typical ghost story, but there's elements in there, because this led to one of the explosions of ghost stories in London. This is what really made people start looking at paranormal events. People around the 1750s were obsessed with ghost stories. So anyway, we're now going to be looking back at the rest of Cock Lane. So originally, the idea was that I was going to go to Smithfield and do a video on Smithfield, which is coming up in the next video. But knowing that Cock Lane was there, I had to cover it because it's quite an important story in London. Knowing the history of Cock Lane as well, knowing this is the furthest point of where the Great Fire of London is, you can see in the video I've taken here in the photos that on the wall you've got this golden buoy. Now this is the golden buoy of Pye Street. Now Pye Street is the point where the Great Fire of London stopped. So it started in Pudding Lane and ended in Pye Street. That sits above a pub that was called the Fortune of War. Not the Fortune of War that we know locally if you're in Essex, in Thurrock and Basildon, but yeah, so this was the Fortune Wall. The Fortune Wall was rather famous because it was dead opposite St Bart's Hospital, or St Bartholomew's Hospital, give it its proper name, which we're going to cover in the next video. And my God, it's going to be an interesting video. I'll tell you, it's that place and that night walking around there was, yeah, creepy, but it's because I knew all the ghost stories about it, and I really did give myself the creeps. But anyway, going back. So during that time, bodies to cut open become very, very tricky. And executions in London had reduced. So it's harder to get hold of these bodies. So what people tended to do was to employ body snatchers. And at the Fortune Wall pub, you could literally walk in there from St Bart's Hospital and see all these bodies laid down with the names of the body snatcher on them, so they know who they had to pay, and they could pick the body they wanted to take back over the road to cut up. So a rather gruesome sight if you ever walked into this pub and not knowing that. What was the eventual downfall of this was obviously Burke and Hare up in Scotland, where they got convicted because they went the next stage and actually murdering people to get the bodies to sell to the hospitals. This didn't really slowed down that much over the next few years in London, but again, eventually the trade died out. And to know that this is a Smith, bodies of animals are sold and cut up, and those slaughterhouses were there all the time anyway, it's quite ironic that human bodies were also available to buy there. In Smithfield, do you know that you could actually sold your wife? Lucky enough, Sam didn't come with me when I was filming this the other night. Makes you wonder how much I could have got. Sorry, Sam. Right, anyway, going back to the ghosts. We do have a ghost story around this building. So we have a doctor that was coming out of St Bart's Hospital. He was standing literally by the wall outside, and he was looking over to the Golden Boy statue, and he's looking up at it, thinking about the history of London, when via the door, which you look at this video, look at the photos now, it's all sort of boarded up and blocked in, but back at that time apparently there's a door on the side that you could come out of. He see a figure emerge from the door carrying what he thought looked like a rucksack, a long rucksack, if you know where I'm going with this. This was around about 10:30 at night, and he was quite puzzled by it. And he see this gentleman start trying to drag it along the street before he disappeared. When I say disappeared, he vanished. The doctor went back in and told people what he see, and he is filled in with the history of it. One thing you'll know about Bart's Hospital, they love their history, and it's all recorded. And he turned around and said, well, obviously I've seen the ghost of an old body snatcher taking bodies out of the old pub. We also have the ghost of a Victorian lady that is said to be seen around the front part of the Golden Boy statue. Now, the Golden Boy statue is meant to be a sign of gluttony or obesity, something to do with the... I'll stick the thing up here, what it's meant to be about. But this Victorian lady is said to be seen walking along round that corner and walking up to people and asking them how they are before vanishing in front of their faces. This has been seen right until 2020. That was our last report of this lady. I've tried to dig more into it, and it's been really hard. There's lots of videos online about Ghosts of Cock Lane. Not many of them cover the body snatchers of Cock Lane and the Fortune of War. You can find lots of videos about the Golden Boy statue, but I don't really focus on this pub. I'd love to know more about it, because the body snatcher ghosts, I think it's a fascinating part of history and our history to know that these... Well, I've always known about Burke and Hare. I didn't know about our body snatchers in London. So when the executions used to happen years ago, the bodies were available to just pass on to the hospital. Once that stopped and it became harder to get hold of these bodies, these people would just go and nick the bodies out of the graves that had just been buried. So anyway, Smithfield's area, and literally Cock Lane is on the edge of the Smithfields area. You can just walk straight up. Is a very historic area of London, and in the next video you're going to see why. So please watch the next video. It's great. I haven't made it yet, but the stories are great. I hope I do them justice. Thank you for watching this one. I know this is quite a short video, but I wanted to do this as a standalone one because although it's in that Smithfield area, it's not quite in keeping with the rest of the stories that I want to tell. And yeah, so thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, put your notifications on, and someone keeps asking me when I'm going to do Harlow. I will get around to do Harlow. I'm waiting for a family to let me know if I can do it, and the same for Ongar as well. So we've got two in the area that I really want to cover, but they are, one's a family ghost story, one's to do with a house that is quite historical, and I want to see if I'm allowed to cover that or not, and I hope they do because it's a lovely story as well. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.